Next, you need to think about organization. How are you going to organize this compare and contrast? And there's two main ways that your book gives for you. And the first one is the one side at a time model. Now, I have an example up here. I have done comparing different pizza restaurants. And the three restaurants that I'm comparing and contrasting are Pizza Hut, Donato's, and Papa John's. For the one side at a time model of organization, I'm going to choose one of the pizza restaurants. In this case, I've chosen Pizza Hut first. And then I have decided what specifics I'm going to be comparing and contrasting. I have chosen 4 different criteria. My criteria are cost/value, which has to do with what you get for what you give, taste, variety, and convenience. And convenience has to do with, is a drive-through available? Is delivery offered? If I want to eat in, is eat-in available? Is it close to my house if I have to go pick it up? That sort of thing. That's what convenience has to do with. So for the one side at a time model, I'm going to discuss each of my criteria for my first restaurant first. So I'm going to discuss everything about Pizza Hut first. All of my criteria will be covered first. Next, I'm going to move to my second restaurant. In this case, it's Donato's. And I'm going to discuss the exact same criteria that I discussed in my first restaurant in the same order. This is an important thing to remember. Discuss the same criteria in the same order for each of the items that you are comparing and contrasting. So for Donato's, I'm also going to discuss cost, value, taste, variety, and convenience in that order. And then I'm going to move on to my third restaurant, which is Papa John's, and I'm going to discuss cost, value, taste, variety, and convenience, all in the same order. This is the important, probably the most important thing to consider when you're doing your compare-contrast essay is the organizational style that you're going to choose. Now, the one side at a time works well for subjects that are not really complex, like choosing a pizza place, not terribly complex. However, if you have an abundance of items that you're comparing and contrasting, and you've got lots of criteria or lots of specific points that you're discussing, then you might want to choose this next method of organization, which is the point by point. The point-by-point method works kind of in the opposite way of the one side at a time. In the point-by-point, we actually start with our criteria. So we're going to start with our first criteria. In this case, I've chosen cost, value. And then I'm going to discuss how each of our restaurants measure up in this criteria. So I'm going to begin my essay with how cost value measures up at Pizza Hut, Donato's, and then Papa John's. And once I have finished discussing all I need to say about cost and value, then I move on to the next point. The next point is taste. And I'm going to discuss how Pizza Hut measures up for taste, how Donato's, and then Papa John's. Again, I'm going to discuss each of my restaurants in the same order for each individual criterion. So after taste, I'm going to move on to variety, and I'm going to discuss each of my restaurants in the same order. Then I'm going to move on to my next criterion, convenience. I'm going to discuss the restaurants in the same order. So if you're comparing and contrasting items that are a little more complex, the point by point is typically the way to go. And historically, my students have done the point by point. It just seems more logical for them. It's easier for them to keep things straight, even if you do have a relatively simple topic or items that you're comparing and contrasting. The point by point usually works the best because it's just easier for students to keep track of point number 1 and then point number 2. It's also easier to keep, for the audience to keep in mind how the different items measure up against one another. And then finally is the use of transitions. And the use of transitions for the compare-contrast essay is really important, but it's also very simple because there are a limited number of possibilities for showing comparing. There are words like similarly, also, in the same way, likewise. These are all transition words and phrases that show similarities. And then words and phrases that show difference are words like, and phrases like by way of contrast, on the other hand, however, but. Words like those can help you show where differences are being pointed out. So transitions are relatively easy to pick out for the compare-contrast essay.